Emergency alarm screams through Terminal 3. Armed terrorists have seized Flight 447 with 300 passengers on the tarmac. 5 men with automatic weapons. Demands for prisoner releases. Threats to execute hostages every hour. But old aircraft mechanic Tony doesn't run for cover. He grabs his wrench and heads straight for the hijacked plane. What happens next will shock the aviation world to its core. You're about to witness what happens when the wrong terrorists hijack the wrong aircraft. Tony Martinez walks across the tarmac with steady purpose. 53 years old. 26 years at LAX Airport. The quietest mechanic in Hangar 7. Airport security tries to stop him. Tony, get back. This is a terrorist situation. Tony doesn't even slow down. I know, that's my plane. Because Flight 447 isn't just any aircraft. It's the Boeing 757 that Tony has maintained for 8 years. Every bolt, every wire, every system. He knows that plane better than the terrorists know their own weapons. 34 seconds. That's all it takes to turn a hijacking into a rescue operation. Tony approaches the aircraft's cargo bay with movements that belong in a combat zone, not a maintenance hangar. He's not just a mechanic anymore. He's something else entirely. First terrorist never sees him coming, guarding the boarding stairs while his team terrorizes passengers above. Tony's wrench connects with the man's skull with surgical precision. Down instantly. Weapon secured. Tony moves like death in coveralls. Up the service ladder to the aircraft's belly. Through the cargo compartment he's accessed 1,000 times. But tonight, he's not checking maintenance logs. Second terrorist realizes something's wrong when his partner stops responding to radio checks. He descends into the cargo hold to investigate and finds himself facing someone who knows every inch of this aircraft. Tony emerges from behind a cargo container. 18-inch torque wrench in hand. One's wing. Clean knockout. Terrorist down. Third terrorist on the passenger deck hears the commotion below. Rodriguez. Status report. Silence. Tony is already moving through the aircraft systems. He knows exactly which breakers to pull to kill cabin lights without affecting emergency systems. The passenger compartment plunges into darkness. In the chaos, Tony moves through his own aircraft like a predator. Night vision isn't technology. It's familiarity. Every seat, every aisle, every emergency exit mapped in muscle memory. Fourth terrorist panics in the darkness, firing wildly at shadows. But Tony has home field advantage in a machine he's maintained for 8 years. Oxygen mask deployed, not for breathing, for restraint. Applied with the precision of someone who understands both aircraft systems and human anatomy. Fifth terrorist, the leader, realizes his operation is falling apart. He grabs a flight attendant, pressing his gun to her head. Show yourself, I'll kill her. Tony emerges from the darkness, hands visible but eyes calculating. Easy, friend. No need for that. The terrorist doesn't realize he's made a tactical error. Standing too close to the aircraft's emergency exit. Poor positioning for a man with hostages. Tony's hand moves to the emergency door release, not to open it. To use the sudden mechanical movement as distraction. The massive door mechanism cycles. Terrorist flinches. Tony strikes. Joint lock that immobilizes without permanent damage. Hostage freed. Final terrorist neutralized. 5 armed terrorists. 34 seconds. 300 passengers saved. Tony stands in the aircraft cabin, breathing normally, like he just completed a routine maintenance check instead of conducting a solo rescue operation. He activates the aircraft's intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is maintenance. Situation secure. Please remain seated while emergency services board the aircraft. As if he just announced a minor delay instead of ending a terrorist crisis. But this story didn't start 34 seconds ago. It started 28 years earlier. The day Staff Sergeant Antonio Tony Martinez, U.S. Air Force, finished his final deployment and applied for civilian aircraft maintenance certification. For 22 years, Tony had served as an aircraft maintenance specialist with the 720th Special Tactics Group. He'd maintained aircraft in hostile environments where mechanical failure meant death for special operations teams. He'd repaired helicopters under enemy fire, serviced transport planes on forward operating bases, kept aircraft flying in conditions that would ground civilian fleets. But Tony hadn't just maintained aircraft. When special tactics teams needed someone who understood both aircraft systems and combat operations, Tony had volunteered for missions that officially never happened. He'd neutralized threats to aircraft, defended airfields from enemy assault, used his knowledge of aviation systems for purposes that had nothing to do with routine maintenance. 28 years ago, Tony had wanted peace, the satisfaction of keeping civilian aircraft safe instead of military aircraft lethal, honest work that helped families travel instead of soldiers fight. LAX Airport offered exactly that opportunity. For 26 years, Tony had been a perfect employee, arrived early, worked late, never complained, fixed aircraft with precision that impressed supervisors who never asked why he was so good at his job. What they didn't know was that Tony had spent his first year studying every security protocol, every emergency procedure, every vulnerability in airport operations. Old habits from a career where such knowledge meant mission success. Tony had built himself a cover identity as complete as any covert operation. Until tonight. Back to the present. FBI agents swarming the aircraft, media helicopters circling overhead, 300 passengers being evacuated safely. Airport Director Sarah Williams approaches Tony as he emerges from the aircraft. "Tony," she says, voice shaking, "what you did in there? How did you know how to handle armed terrorists?" Tony wipes his hands on the shop rag, each movement precise and controlled. "I know that aircraft, every system, every access point, every vulnerability." That wasn't just aircraft knowledge, that was tactical expertise, military precision. For 26 years, Tony has avoided this conversation. For 26 years, he successfully separated his Air Force Special Tactics past from his civilian maintenance present. But there's no separating them now. Air Force Special Tactics, he says simply. 720th Group, Aircraft Maintenance and Operations Security. The words hit the tarmac like jet engines at full throttle. Williams stares at him. "You're telling me that for 26 years, LAX has had a Special Tactics operator maintaining our aircraft?" "Former Special Tactics," Tony corrects. "I'm a mechanic now. I keep planes safe." "But what you did tonight?" Tony looks at Flight 447, passenger safely evacuated, aircraft secure. "I did what I had to do to protect my aircraft and the people inside it." FBI Special Agent Rodriguez arrives to debrief what appears to be the most unusual terrorist incident in aviation history. The 5 terrorists are identified as members of an international cell that had been targeting commercial aviation to force government policy changes through civilian casualties. They'd researched Flight 447's schedule, passenger manifest, and security protocols. They'd planned for law enforcement response, negotiation tactics, and media coverage. They hadn't planned for encountering someone who understood both aircraft systems and counter-terrorism operations. "Mr. Martinez," Agent Rodriguez says, "your response was unlike anything we've seen. Where did you learn to use aircraft knowledge for tactical purposes?" Tony checks the aircraft's maintenance log, noting systems that need inspection after the incident. "In Special Tactics, you learn that aircraft aren't just machines, they're weapon systems, rescue platforms, and tactical assets. Understanding them completely means understanding how to use them for any mission." Young mechanic Jake approaches hesitantly. He'd worked alongside Tony for 3 years, never suspecting his colleague's background. "Tony, how did you stay so calm? How did you know exactly what to do?" Tony looks at the young mechanic who reminds him of himself decades ago, dedicated to aviation, unprepared for the reality that sometimes mechanics must fight to protect their mission. "In my previous job, I learned that keeping aircraft safe sometimes requires eliminating threats to those aircraft. The skills aren't different, the context is." 3 weeks later, Tony makes a decision that changes his career. He begins working with airport security agencies, teaching them how aircraft knowledge can be used for counter-terrorism operations. The work allows him to use his special tactics expertise without returning to military deployment. He keeps his position at LAX, but he no longer feels the need to completely separate his Air Force experience from his civilian maintenance work. Word spreads through the aviation security community. LAX becomes known as one of the most secure airports in the world, not just because of technology, but because everyone knows Tony Martinez is watching the aircraft. The ghost of Hangar 7 revealed himself to be something far more substantial than anyone imagined. A guardian who'd been hiding in plain sight, protecting civilian aviation one aircraft at a time. The families of Flight 447 passengers never forgot. They returned to LAX specifically to fly on aircraft maintained by Tony. Not because they owe him, but because they understand what his presence represents. Local news covers the story. Mechanic stops aircraft hijacking, but Tony declines all interviews. He's not interested in fame. He's interested in the next aircraft inspection, the next maintenance check, the next opportunity to serve civilian aviation with skills earned in military service. Because that's who Tony Martinez chose to become. Not a warrior, not a hero, just a mechanic who happens to possess knowledge that saved lives when evil threatened his aircraft. Airport employees sleep better knowing Tony's watching over their workplace. Passengers fly more confidently knowing their aircraft are maintained by someone who understands both mechanical systems and security threats. So I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose technical expertise seemed to extend beyond their job requirements? Someone whose competence suggested training they couldn't discuss? Share their story in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful protection comes from those who've chosen peace but never forgotten how to wage technical warfare. Thank you for watching. If this moved you, subscribe and help us honor the quiet guardians who protect civilian aviation. These are the people who remind us that heroes don't always wear flight suits. Sometimes they wear coveralls and smell like jet fuel, until the moment their aircraft needs them to be something more. And remember, the next time you see an aircraft mechanic whose work seems too precise, whose awareness seems too sharp, whose knowledge seems too complete, you might be trusting your life to someone whose training included lessons about more than just aircraft maintenance, but who chose to use that training to keep you safe in the sky, one flight at a time.